See up there too. Hello everyone. Bill Ribaudo, you will be familiar with, if you are a veteran of this event, as many of you are, and as of course I am, and we have spoken, Bill and I, together on this stage before, in what is an evolving project for you, Bill, right? It's a project that spanned years, looking at digital risk, but also, I suppose, building it from the ground up, now to the national level. I don't know if today we can describe this as the climax, the crescendo, the final movement of what has been at least
it's an interim one.
It's an interim one,
yet
right?
Another one,
it's,
right?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
We're going to have the intergalactic business models next year, but for now we're looking at countries. So, Bill.
So, Ed, you're right. This is my fourth time speaking at FiRe. For some of you that have been here for the previous years, you'll see the relationship of what we spoke about before. Ed, in our very first conversation we had, I shared the results of work that we did looking at companies and company business model and the correlation of a company's business model to its Wall Street valuation. A short story just to set this up for us today. We studied the S&P 500 over 40 years. What we saw is you could take every single company and put it into 4 categories based on the assets that they leveraged to make their money. And think about it as physical assets, human assets, IP assets, or network assets. And what we found as a result of doing that is that each of those types of businesses were worth a different multiple of revenue. And so here you see in the bottom left, you have companies that leverage physical assets. We call them asset builders. Think about that business model as for every one you want to sell, you have to make one. So make one, sell one. It's the industrials, the hospitals, the hotels. You've got the services industry where you have to, for every hour you want to bill, you have got to hire it, usually in 2,000-hour increments. The consultants, the financial services, the insurance companies, right? So they're leveraging human assets or financial assets. You cross this digital divide, and you have the IP-based companies, where once you invent it, then you can license it for multiple times at very, very little incremental cost. We call that make it once, sell it many times. Or you have the network-based companies where many people are making, many people are selling kind of on that, in most cases, a technological platform. The older style companies would be the credit card companies, the stock exchanges, but of course the social network companies that are here now. And then what we saw was once you put everybody into those categories based on the assets that they leverage, that what they were worth on Wall Street was 1 times revenue, 2 times revenue, 4 times revenue, or 8 times revenue. And what we showed over a period of time is that value shifted over the decades. It shifted from all the money was made in the Industrial Revolution, the industrialists, the railroad barons, the shipping magnates, to services guys never really made a lot of money, to it was the $100 million men in Silicon Valley with the information revolution, right? And the easy way to be able to tell that is just look at whose pictures are on the covers of all the magazines. The industrialists, the information dudes, and now you have the 30-year-old billionaires. And so value has shifted in the public markets based on the business model. So that's kind of the beginning of what it was, Ed.
Yeah, and so now you have scaled that up because you were looking at companies, and I think Mark Anderson said to you that first year, great, Bill, what does this say? What does this say when we take this to a higher level?
That's right. In fact, it was 4 years ago at that first presentation, Mark asked the first question, and he got me thinking as a result of that question. And that question was, Bill, how does this relate to countries? What about the business model of a country? And then Mark and I had a number of conversations that ensued that summer. We did some more work. I've been back here on stage talking about it, but we've taken it yet to a further, much more detailed level than that. What we've basically done now, and we wrote a special letter, many of you are subscribers, and so you would have seen it. We released it on September 5th. It was at the same time that I was speaking at the 28th Annual Economic Forum in Krynica, Poland, where we showed the correlation of company business model, so this 1248, to country GDP. So just stop for a minute and think, well, wait a minute. First thing what I've done is I've said that $1 of revenue is not equal to $1 of value. Some dollars of revenue are worth more. What is the measurement of GDP? And this was the conversation Mark and I were having, right? Well, wait a minute. GDP is $1 equals $1. GDP is the output of goods and services. So if I were to take two of the largest, or the two largest economies in the world, the US at 19 trillion and China at 11 trillion, are those equal measures? Is 19 almost double 11? So is the US economy worth roughly twice the economy of China? Or if you began to apply this model, might it be worth much more? Where does, in the case of those two countries, or you can start to talk about other countries, and I'm going to show you in a moment, where does a country make its money? On what types of companies using what types of business models? And so, I'll show you one of the money slides. Now, this one's got a lot of data on it, but like a nice Van Gogh, just step back and just look with me.
Narrow your eyes a little.
Right. Look with me that green equals green and red equals red in the columns. What you see here is we studied over a 7-year, the study period was 7 years of data in 3 pieces, 3 years, 2 years, and 2 years. So we actually did the study 3 times, got the same results, and it's covered 7 years of economic data. This is about 67% of global GDP. It's the 9 or 11, more or less, largest economies. And what it says basically is if in a country it supports the latter 2 business models, IP, creation and licensing, and network orchestration, if you support all 4 business models, you have positive GDP. If you do not, if you largely support the 2 earlier business models, which is manufacturing and services, your GDP declines. So there's positive correlation. Careful to use the word correlation, not causation. I can't prove that, but I can prove correlation, that if you support all 4 business models, your economy grows. If you don't, it shrinks. And every now and then there's an exception. It actually helps prove that the model works. So look at the UK as an example. In 2015 to 2017, even though they were supporting those business models, they had a declining economy, largely as I think we would all agree, Brexit.
Yeah.
But what's interesting here is you can take all that data and make it a little bit simpler and see that the countries fall into 3 categories. The scale is growth, and then whether their business models are above that digital divide and by how far. So you have China, US, India, Israel, and the UK versus Switzerland, Brazil, Italy, Japan, and Germany and France. Kind of actually, if you went back to the previous graph, you would see some reds and reds, and then greens and greens, and then reds and reds again. Now what's interesting here is that what we also did was we looked at not only what is in the economy, but what are their policies. So if you look at what's in the economy, here what you see is, and these are just some of the parameters that we use to measure. And we actually have a grade. I took the grading out because we don't like to release it unless we're in a private conversation. But we have a grade for each one of these countries based on how well they score with the adoption of 4 business models. And then underneath that, we looked at their actual regulatory landscape and looked at it from unfavorable to favorable. And we can gauge that as well. So now you can begin to see how a country could modify or contemporize its policymaking and regulation in order to grow its economy.
So you are now, actually, let's just step back from that a second. And on an individual basis, we could take 2 of those countries, I don't know, let's say Germany, a country with an economy that is generally kind of tends to get praised a fair amount. It's obviously export-driven economy. And it will have whatever the numbers have been for the last few years. You put that against the United States. I'm not sure who's going to have a higher GDP figure over the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years. But you're going to give them a different scoring according to the fact that, I guess, by your standards, the United States has basically got a better rounded business model than Germany?
Yes, and comparatively correct.
So the United States GDP is actually better than Germany's, even though they're hitting equal numbers, let's say, 3 or 4%.
Okay, so you've raised about 3 issues on top of one. So one, the size of the economies will never, they'll never come together. Right?
Sure, I'm talking about rates of growth.
But if you look at the rates of growth, yes. And so what our work has shown is that the U.S. economy has more consistently grown, and we believe that's because of the correlation of the strength around the 4 business models. Germany has more inconsistent growth in their support for those business models varies. Let me give you an example. Just when we talk about regulatory support for a business model, I love to use this one because it is such a great example where you can look at it like this in one country and go to the other country and it looks like this, but it's the exact same issue. And how could that be true? So let's take e-hailing as an example. So we all recognize that the big 2 e-hailing taxi companies in the United States have grown dramatically and done very well in the United States. And the United States more or less has very strong policies that help those companies get created and flourish. Now you can go into individual states or cities and you can see sometimes where that changes. I remember being at the Consumer Electronics Show where I also speak, and one year I could use Uber and another year I couldn't use them, and then I could use them, right? Because they were in, they were out, they were in, they were out. So now let's take e-hailing and bring it to London. Is it in or is it out? First it's in, then it's out, then it's in. Well, it's in right now, but it's under temporary, right? And what's happening? There's a fight going on between the establishment, or the established drivers, or the drivers of the black cabs, and all the Uber drivers. And the question is, what piece of that are the politicians going to support? I would look here factually and I would say if you want to have a growing economy, London, you would at least support both, right? And be careful here. I'm not saying or. Our conclusions are and. All 4 business models in some level of balance. We didn't test how you get to the refinement, because what you have is economies that support 4 and economies that largely support 2. So it was pretty easy so far. Hopefully over time it'll get more complicated because then you have to look at gradations. But right now you would say, well then I should support that. But why don't they support it? Is it an economic issue for the politicians, or is it call it a political issue?
Let's get to the politics in a second.
Let me just finish the story though, because I love it, sorry.
No, do.
But so think about it, right? So who are the drivers of the black taxis in London? Who are they? Born and bred British. Who are the Uber drivers? Immigrants. Take the exact same issue and flip it around in New York City. New York City, but who own the cars in New York City versus who are the taxi drivers? So we have 2 large metropolitan cities, the same issue, but politically it's reversed. And you can get a different answer, which means that the politicians, rightly or wrongly, are mixing economics and politics. And so I come back and I go, if you want to know what the economic answer is, I have that for you. Sorry.
But to go back to the philosophy of the national business model, then it is you are advising and embracing the concept of balance, right? Balance across the 4 sectors, the four
yes,
elements.
right.
There is a kind of logic, though, is there not, that if we all had Facebook-style corporations, we'd be best off because they're giving you the 8 times return, as opposed to the 1-to-1
right.
at the bottom end. But you're saying balance is best, and the philosophy behind, I guess, why you're saying that is the old idea of eggs in baskets.
Yes.
You want them spread.
So it's a combination of that. Now we've labeled our point of view as the Great Race. And with this latest paper, special letter issued that deals with this country issue, we call it the Great Open Close Parens Country Race. Right? And so there's the Great Corporate Race, and now the Great Country Race. And the race, Ed, is because we do not live in a virtual world. And what's happening right now, based on the original 1248 study, is that there's a bifurcation in the public markets on what they are valuing. If you want to raise money today, fire starters, where are you, right? If you want to raise money today and you want to be able to drive a stock price high, the business has to scale. What gives a company the ability to scale a business fast? It has to have a business model that scales fast. So for everything you want to sell that you have to make, that doesn't scale fast. So what's happening right now, there's a bifurcation of value. All the value is going to the tech guys that have these upper business models. And the value is not going to the big manufacturers. But there's an opportunity for the big manufacturers to figure out, how do I become more virtual? But at the same time, we see that these virtual guys are buying physical businesses. And so it's setting up this great race, because the end of the race is equilibrium, because we need all four business models. The companies that will win will be those that have the ability to adopt all four business models, because that's how you better serve your customer. And there's going to be carnage along the way. That great corporate race is the exact same issue for countries. Countries are in a race. Race for talent, race for capital, race for growth. How are you going to grow an economy? For business models.
So the big corporations, I guess you would say, you speak to them all the time.
I do.
They get this. I mean, implicitly, they may not have got your metrics, but they get the concept, right?
They get the concept. I would tell you, the biggest issue that we actually have today is the overused term digital. I mean, are you guys tired of this word? We're going digital. We're becoming digital. We are digital. What the heck does it even mean? It's like, we're transforming. They've ruined the word. I think there's two kinds of digital. There's digital in the business and digital as the business. I'm talking about digital as the business, based on what Wall Street or the public markets will value you. Digital in the business is just IT. If we used the term digital 15 years ago and we were putting in an ERP system, we'd be saying we're going digital. Digital is just IT. Digital in the business makes your business better, faster, cheaper. It doesn't change your Wall Street valuation. I have shown Fortune 50 companies how to change their valuation by $100 billion by following this model.
And then we come to countries. How good are countries at even understanding instinctively what you're describing? You speak to politicians?
Some. This is a newer element for us. It's a challenge.
Do they sound completely clueless when you come to them with this stuff?
It depends. In different countries, you can actually start to segment the prime ministers and presidents and the like between those that have been business people before and those that haven't, and the business people get it pretty quick.
But finance ministries on the whole are not looking to say, what we really need is a balanced economy with 4 different sections, including,
right.
These different 4 areas. They're not really thinking in those terms, right? They're just going for the low-hanging fruit.
They
that
want
they can
growth. They want jobs, right? And and I saw this in spades when I was on the stage with some of them in Poland last month, listening to their thought process. So we use another concept called mental models. And I have a way that I could walk you through this, but quickly, tell me what you believe if you're going to build a business. Tell me what you believe, and I'll tell you what you're worth. It's really simple, right? So this is what I believe, and I can build a business that's worth, that has, let's do it simple. This is what I believe, and I can build $1 billion turnover company. What am I going to be worth? Do you believe that making things is the best way to build value without bringing in the other concepts? I'll tell you what you're worth. $1 billion business, worth $1 billion. You want to build $1 billion business that's worth $8 billion? Or some mixture in between. You do the same thing with country leaders. So I get it, you want jobs, and what I heard in Poland was, we're becoming more technical. Now, I don't mean this for Poland, we were just in Poland, so to be clear. We're becoming more of a technified economy, because we're educating and growing programmers. No, all you're doing is creating cheap labor as a services model. That's only going to grow your economy so far. You've got to invent IP, not build IP for somebody else who's going to own it. regardless of where they put it for tax purposes, right? Which gets back to the very beginning part of the conversation, which is, why is an economy worth more than another one? So to your point, Ed, what the politicians need to understand is that if they want to stay in power, if they want their party to stay in power, bottom line, they have to grow the economy. And they have everybody talking to them about different ways in which to grow that economy. This is another way to think about it, on how you can do balance. And then because, I wish I had the other slide to show you, but we only actually have, I think it's 25 of them on the slide, but it's amazing. I show you this slide that has 12 countries across the top and 25 down the right-hand side, and it looks like that, but with all of these stacked this way, and the spreadsheet is 80. So I got 80 key parameters, 12 countries, 70% of global GDP, and I can compare one country against another based on those 80 different parameters. So what the opportunity that countries have that I don't think have had to date, again, based on this IP, is that they can do what corporate America does, which is do best practices. What are other companies doing that I could leverage? And these other countries could say, what are other regulatory policies could I be thinking about or modifying that the countries that seem to have higher growth, the GDP, than myself?
I was trying to do a kind of mime to get you to come to microphones, which didn't really work. Yeah, please do. There may be time for one question from somebody if you want to put that. So basically, you are giving people sustainability, right? I mean, it's not just growth in the next 5 years, because obviously that's not something that you can ever guarantee. Right. But you could go for the low-hanging fruit. But what you are perhaps giving people is a kind of inoculation against the next crash.
Right. I think you're right. If someone said, to your eggs in the basket question, Ed, right? If somebody said, how do I kind of solidify or damage-proof my economy? This is what I would want to do. And this is the same conversation with company leaders. So I say something, everyone talks about technology's changing and everything's changing and say, well, there's a lot of change, but let's talk about what hasn't changed. Shareholders pay for the promise of future profits. So give them something that they can rely on so that you can promise them future profits of high growth. Give them a business model that'll do that. What also hasn't changed? Management is in business to serve their customers better than their competitors using today's latest technologies. What's changed that makes it difficult is how fast the technology has grown. And what ends up happening is we have people in leadership of corporations that don't understand the new technologies in their capabilities because they didn't grow up with it. And so we go back to the mental models. And so as a result, your model is what you've grown your entire career on, and that's what you measure, that's what you monitor, but you've got to change this. It's the same issue for the countries. The toughest thing is to get it to change. Less than 10% of the S&P 500 is above the digital divide. The majority of the United States, the most advanced economy with 4 business models, 85% of it is still in the bottom. Huge opportunity. We're at the beginning of this shift.
Corporations are occasionally, let's face it, accused of short-termism. Are governments less guilty of that?
No, they're just as guilty with the short term being defined as a longer period. So they have 2 or 4 years instead of a quarter.
Electoral cycles.
But in the grand scheme of the shifts, and I wish I had the other slide I have with the economic revolutions and the correlation of each one of these correlates to an economic revolution. The Industrial Revolution, the Services Revolution, the IP Revolution, the Network Revolution. Those happened over decades. It's probably the one, I get in trouble for maybe saying this, but it may be the one advantage these more dictatorial, despot-oriented countries have as an opportunity, because if you can stay in power or have the confidence that you can be in power for 20 years, then you can do something about it instead of shifting it every 4.
Mark?
Yes.
So thank you for this. This is very helpful to me. Is this a model that we should be sharing with our kids as we advise them as to what to do with their lives?
So thank you for asking that question. And Mark and I had this conversation at Predictions East in December. So we're writing a book on all of this. It's called The Great Race, and I keep promising it's going to be out next year. and it takes us longer. Maybe it's like doing a film documentary. I think it will be 5 years by the time we're done with it. The last chapter of the book is entitled How We Speak to Our Children. And it's what Mark and I talked about in New York in December of last year. If all of this is true, if a dollar doesn't equal it, all of that, what does this mean for companies? What does this mean for countries? What does this mean for education? We did a study. We looked at the top 10 business schools in the United States. I think we talked about this actually last year. We looked at the Ivy League schools in the United States. So undergrad, Ivy League school, business school, top 10 grad, and then we went to major countries, major MBA universities. On average, doesn't matter, pick the country, I could change the title, it wouldn't matter. 93 to 97% of the content we're teaching our business children is based on 1 and 2 models down the bottom. And what we don't even realize, and so that's a chapter, but the chapter on our children, I'm thinking children, where we don't even recognize what values we are instilling in them. And I don't mean cultural, religious, or anything else. Maybe it's business, I don't know, but what is valuable? So what do we do today? We buy them an erector set and a plow, to go build something, which is not bad, right? That's fine. The bottom left, good, got it, check mark. How many toys are there that's helping them code? Now we have coding for girls, but that's a gender problem we're trying to solve, or not a gender problem, but a gender equality problem. But when we talk and speak with our children, we don't realize the value. I have 2 younger boys. My boys are 6 and 9. And my wife's trying to get us into old board games, because it'd be fun and it's a good family thing, and it really is. I was amazed. I was the banker for Monopoly. And I was teaching my 6-year-old, okay, well, how many 5s are in a 20? It was amazing. It was great. But you know what the board was all about? It was all about real estate. There wasn't anything in there about building a technology company, about orchestrating a network. If you could build something that got everyone talking together, what would that be worth? No, buy Park Place or mortgage it. And one of my friends said, oh, Bill, then you got to go to Monopoly and get a license. I said, well, I'm not there yet. Let the book go out. Then I'll go to Mattel and tell them that they need to license, my IP so they can build a Monopoly game based on this. So yes, I think this is super, super important. And so the structure of the book is, what is it? We've been talking about that. Part 2 of the book is, what does this mean for 10 different industry sectors? So bring it down a lower level. And then the other one is, what's this mean for education? What's this mean with GDP? What's this mean for dealing with our children? Yes, another question.
We are actually out of time, and I'm going to be in big trouble if I allow this. And I'm really sorry, because you stood earlier and I thought you'd sat down.
I went on too long. I'll catch you right after.
Anyway, we are out of time. Address anything to Bill in the break. I'm sure he'd be ready to.
And the GDP paper is out on the desk, guys. Thank you.